Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to talk about mission-specific rules about day and night fighting, and also how you figure out the time of day if the mission requires it. Originally, I was going to go like over recon and some stuff like that, but then I saw they referenced rules in the missions, so I decided, you know what, I'm going to cover all these little special rules that could happen in the missions, so I don't have to repeat myself on like the recon video. So that's the plan for why I did this video first. So let me get set up for talking about mission special rules. Alright, the first mission specific rule I want to talk about, or special rule, would be called meeting engagement. So basically what's going on is, let's say the Americans are marching across Europe or something, you know, France or something. And then lo and behold, Germany's marching across there, and they run into each other. They go, whoa, whoa, oh my gosh, it's the enemy. Guys, we got to fight. So neither side is prepared for the battle. So this is where meeting engagement comes from. And basically, there's a few rules that the player who goes first in that turn has to follow. So it's not going to be for both players. It will be for both players in a way, but, well, no, really it's just for the first player. For whoever gets to go first in turn one, these rules apply, or penalties, I'll say. It's another way to think about it. For the player who goes second in the first turn, these penalties do not, I should have another way, do not apply. And then from turn two on, these penalties apply to neither player. So it's whoever goes first in the first turn, these rules or penalties will apply. And it's basically to make it kind of a fair fight, because I have been in games where whoever gets to go first can just devastate the opponent before they have any time to react. I mean, there's some people that do like that, but to me that takes some of the challenge out of the game, because you wiped out 1/3 of their army already, so the game is not 2,000 points against 2,000. It can be 2,000 versus 1,300 now, because you wiped out so much of their forces. So Flames of War kind of takes care of that with this special rule, because neither side is ready for the battle. So what are these special rules? Well, the first thing is, whether or not you move, you shoot as if you did move. So this Sherman normally gets, let me move in the center here, normally gets 2 dice with its main guns. I'm going first, and it's meeting engagement, and I want to shoot at a Stug here. Well, normally I didn't move. Let's say I didn't move. Normally I would get 2 dice at it, but because I'm going first on the first turn and it's meeting engagement, I'm down to 1 die. So I might as well just move and keep the 1 die. So whether or not I moved, my rate of fire is going to drop. So that means if, say, these guys get 2 shots, they're going down to 1, 3 shots down to 1, and so forth. It's whatever your movement rate drops you to. If this has 1 shot, let's say it's not doing an artillery bombardment, but it's doing a stray shot on this. Normally it gets 1 shot. Well, now it has to add 1 to its 2 hit roll. So I've talked about, you know, if you move, your rate of fire is going down. So meeting engagement, you're not prepared. It's like, oh my gosh, there's a bad guy, I gotta get ready, you know. So your rate of fire is going to drop, whether or not you moved. Since you're not ready, your artillery bombardments being moved along, they're plopped out here. The guys are getting, oh gosh, there's bad guys. Let's get these things out. So this is not ready to fire. So whoever has first turn, whoever goes first on first turn, does not get to shoot their artillery bombardment. They can do the stray shots at the penalty of as if it moved, but as far as them wanting to, you know, do their template, they can't do that. That doesn't, again, that does not apply to who goes second in the first turn, because this gives these people time, if they want to dig in and stuff like that, to prepare for the opponent. So rate of fire is going to drop, whether or not you moved. No artillery bombardment. And the last thing, no ground attack aircraft, because you haven't had time to call in that support yet. It's like, oh my gosh, the bad guys are here. Everybody get ready, get ready, get ready. So the aircraft hasn't had a chance to be called to come in saying, we need your help. Now, if you do have this, you will deploy it as usual. Now, you can't use it to call in artillery bombardments, but remember, I think it's a USA special rule that you can use it to help you keep from getting ambushed in certain areas. So you can use it for that. So no ground attack aircraft, but you still can do your AOP, but of course it's not going to spot for you. And that's pretty much the rules for the meeting engagement. There is, and this is really kind of an interesting rule for meeting engagement, and that is sometimes you have units that, I'm just going to put these out here so you have something to look at. Sometimes you have units that like always attack. So your team, your company has the always attack rules, or you may have the always defend rules. Well, in this case, that's with meeting engagement, that's thrown out the window because you guys have been marching along, like, oh, you guys just ran into each other. So the Americans and the Germans just ran into each other. There's no attacker. There's no defender. They weren't prepared. They weren't prepared. So in this case, that rule is thrown out, and both of you roll to see who's the attacker. So let's say Germany's white and America's black. Whoever gets the highest, we got a 3 and a 5. So Germany's the attacker, America is the defender. If there's a tie, re-roll. And this time America won. So just remember, in meeting engagement, the always attack and always defend rule is out of there. It's not used because you just ran into each other. All right, the next thing, another special rule that could happen is called prepared positions. Well, as it sounds like, you're prepared, you're ready for the battle. So any infantry or gun teams, you have the choice. And the mission will tell you whether or not both players start with this or not with the prepared positions. But you can decide if you get it. Any infantry and gun teams, so that means no tank teams, no unarmored vehicles, and no transports. So no vehicles whatsoever, only infantry and gun teams. You can decide, not only are they dug in, you can dig them in for free. This is given to you at the start of the game. They're dug in. You don't even have to roll a skill check. Also, gone to ground. So you can put both those bonuses onto your units, but that also means that the opponent's going to get to use their artillery against you, their ground attack aircraft, and their full rate of fire, because they know you're there and but you're prepared for them. So that's all prepared positions is infantry and gun teams can start the game dug in and gone to ground. All right, what I want to talk about now is ambushes. And the mission will tell you whether or not you get to put anybody in ambush. And there's a difference between ambush and immediate ambush. And I'll talk about immediate ambush after this. So ambush. Basically, let's say I'm able to put on the table, and this represents a platoon. So I get a platoon of Shermans, my long toms, and a platoon of infantry on the table. So that's what I'm going to start the game with, on the table. The rule says I get to put one of these in ambush. So I get to choose, and you may have special rules or some of the mission says even more than that, but I'm just going to go with one right now. So do I want to hold the tank in ambush, the artillery in ambush, or the infantry in ambush? So let's say I'm going to put the tanks in ambush. So I set those to the side. They're technically still on the table, but my opponent does not know where they are, and my opponent can do nothing to really, he can't kill them when they're in ambush. Okay, I deploy these two as regularly. So the mission will tell you what you can hold off in ambush as far as whether or not you have reserves, which I'll talk about reserves. And normally it's like what you have left to deploy on the table, pick one of them to be, if you want to, put into ambush. So I'm going to put this in ambush. I deploy these as regularly. These are on the table somewhere, but my opponent does not know. And technically, I don't really know where they are either, if you really want to get down to it. Because I get to deploy this when I want to. Not when I want to, but there's a certain place. And we're going to talk about where to deploy those, or how, first of all. So let me clear this out. So when can you bring your ambush into play? So I've got that tank team in ambush. Not tank team, but that platoon in ambush. When can I bring them into the game? Well, let's go back to, and I already talked about the starting step. So let's go back to our starting step. So we check soul, surviving company, morale, victory. Ah, there it is. Number 4, reveal ambushes. You don't have to reveal your ambush on turn 1. You can wait till turn 2, 3, 4, 5. As long as the game's still going and it's your turn and the game's still going, you can reveal the ambushes at that time. So this is when you reveal the ambush. Yeah, I'm going to bring them in the game. And then put them where they belong. Well, where can you put them? So the rules are, I have to put the whole platoon that was in ambush on the table. I can't hold part of the platoon back and only put these on. And then later in the game, oh, they're part of the ambush, they're coming in. No. If I deploy this platoon, the whole platoon gets deployed, and they have to remain in command. So let's say this is over here, and that's over here. And let's say they're conscripts, so they're going to be within 4 inches of each other. I can't do that. They're more than 4 inches away. I'd have to move this one over and there. I'm okay now. So when you deploy them, they have to be in command, and you have to deploy the whole platoon. So, okay, I can deploy this whole platoon, but where? First of all, it has to be in your deployment zone because they are in prepared position. So no man's land is no ambush land. And of course, the enemy's deployment zone is no, they can ambush from there, but you can't put yours in no man's land, and the enemy's deployment zone has to be in your deployment zone. So that seems pretty simple. Put them out in command, in your deployment zone, at the starting step when you want to bring them in. There's still a few more rules we have to follow, but they're not very difficult. We'll get set up for that. Alright, so we got the Stug out here. And let's just say it's a Stug platoon. So I'm going to bring this one out and this one out. So it's my turn, and I'm going to bring out, I've decided I'm going to bring out my ambush. And it's this platoon of Shermans. And this is in my deployment zone. There's a few rules about how close you can be to an enemy unit. So one of the rules is, and I'm going to move this a little closer for this demonstration purpose. One of the rules is, if it's all to do with everything has to be line of sight. Really, it's line of sight. It's going to be a big key to this. So yeah, these Germans have line of sight to this ambushing Sherman platoon. So the rules is, if it's in line of sight, it can't be within 16 inches. So there is no way this Sherman platoon can be there because they're being deployed within 16 inches and there's line of sight. There's a slight twist on this though. Now they have concealment from them. So it's no longer that 16 inches, within 16 inches. Now these Shermans cannot be deployed within 4. So I can move these guys right up here if I want to. As long as I'm not with it. Oh, I have to move that one back. There we go. Let's just pretend. There we go. Okay. So no line of, remember, line of sight period. You have to have line of sight. So line of sight, no concealment, cannot be within 16. Line of sight but concealment can't be within 4. Now I'm going to take these off for another. All right. So, in that case, what I'm going to do is, this American infantry team's in there, and they're able to see out the sides here, but not this way, because there's no opening here. And they haven't dug in to create an opening. And these Germans, infantry, actually I'm just going to keep stug, just keep it simple. These stugs are held in ambush, and they go, ha ha, you don't have line of sight to me, because remember, line of sight's required for that 16 or 8 inches. You don't have line of sight of me, so I can go within 4. No. Even if they don't have line of sight, you cannot place any ambushing unit within 4 inches of an enemy team. So it has that, and normally that's the assaulting range, so that means you won't be able to go in ambush and then assault. So just keep that in mind. It's preventing assaults when you come in ambush, which can be pretty devastating. All right, so we talked about not within 16, not within 4, and not within 4. But there's one last group we have to talk about, and this is one of the reasons I decided to do the missions first, because it's talking about reconnaissance. So I'm going to pretend that this is my reconnaissance unit, my little Jeep here. They're running around doing reconnaissance, and these Germans want to ambush them. Well, you know what? They can't be within 16 of this. No concealment. Whoop, they got concealment. So that means not within 4 of this. Okay, so I'm okay there. They're not within 4 of this reconnaissance. Well, maybe they are a little bit. There we go. They're not within 4 of that reconnaissance unit. Woohoo! I'm okay. No. Reconnaissance has a little special rule. Even if you are concealed, you can't go within 8 inches. Period. And again, it has to be line of sight. So if this, and of course, this can't happen at the Jeep Center, so I'm going to move these guys. These guys are my recon. They're in this building. Well, there's no line of sight this way, so they can get within 8 inches, but not within 4. If there is a line of sight issue, and you're trying to ambush within 8 inches, within 4 inches, I should say, of this, we can within 4, period. But the rule is they're going to double that distance from 4 to 8 inches. So that means they're going to have to move way back over there. So that's one of the nice things about the recon, is they can push those ambushes back if they have line of sight. And I will touch a little bit on this. Remember that they have, the USA has a special rule with this about, I think it's within 12 or 16 inches. If it didn't spot for artillery bombardment, no ambush within, and again, it's that line of sight. Within line of sight, and to the ambushing team, they can't be within 12. So that's kind of an interesting twist on it, because if you think about recon, or regular, okay, line of sight, concealed, not within 4. Line of sight, period, 8. Line of sight, concealed or not, 12. And line of sight in the open, 16. So it's kind of 4 inches, 4, 8, 12, 16. So don't forget about the AOP. Now I'm going to bring this guy back out here, and we're going to bring the concealing terrain back out, just for purposes of this, and those Germans that we're trying to ambush. And of course, you know what, can be within 8 inches of it. However, this vehicle's bogged down. Now that rule no longer applies. It's just like any other, like infantry team, just can't go within 4. If it is bailed out, same situation. I ignore that as far as can't go within 4. Because remember, you can't go within 4 of any enemy team. Also, if it moved at the double, because if it's moving at the double, it's not spotting people. It's just racing around. So if it moved at the double, I get to ignore that 8 inches for recon. Okay. Now, another group you have to watch out for are heavy and immobile gun teams. They have their own little special rule. So we've had a rule about infantry and all that, that not within 16, but if concealed, not within 4. Recon, if there's not concealment, it says 16 inches. If there is concealment, 8 inches. And we talked a little bit about the AOP, within 12. But immobile and gun teams are huge monsters, so they're a little harder to hide. So the rule is, whether or not this is out on the field, or you bring in an ambush and it's being towed. It doesn't matter. Being towed, being towed or not, limbered or unlimbered. When you bring in the ambush of this, and of course it's that line of sight, it just, concealment or not, you can't put them within 16 inches of any enemy team that's in line of sight. It's just so big it's hard to hide. Oh, and also should say any weapon rated as bunker buster. So let's, I know it doesn't, but just pretend if the Sherman was a bunker buster, which I believe maybe the 105s have. If it's rated as a bunker buster, it applies the same rule as a heavy and immobile gun team. In line of sight, concealment or not, you can't go within 16 inches of an enemy team. There we go. So we've talked about who can go in ambush, where they can go, basically your deployment zone, and then a few restrictions as far as make sure, line of sight and not within a certain inches of the enemy. Okay, so they come in. Boom, I brought this artillery in. What are they able to do? Well, first of all, if the game has where your teams or your company or whatever mission says you start in prepared positions, they are also brought in ambush in prepared positions because they were already there. They already dug in, they're gone to ground. Remember, infantry and gun teams only. So if I ambushed these tanks, they don't get it. Okay, that's nice. Is there anything else they get? Yeah, they get their full rate of fire. So again, if I bring my Shermans in, and these Stugs are over here, and then this is concealed, and I bring in, I ambushed a platoon of Shermans, not within 4. They get, I'm going to squeeze these in just for purposes of demonstrating this. They would get their full rate of fire. So 2 dice, 2 dice, 2 dice. That means 6 dice as long as they don't move. If they move, they're going to get 3 dice. If they don't move, they're going to get the full 6 dice. And let's say these guys are trained at 3, concealment 4, so I need 4s hit. Oh my gosh, maybe they're not concealed. Oh, they're concealed. So needing 4s. Wow, I rolled absolutely horrid. But so they hit 1 time. So remember, when you come out of concealment, you get your full rate of fire as long as you don't move. Okay, that's nice. But what about if I ambushed my artillery? Oh, gun team. The mission said they've gone to ground and dug in. I could do my straight shot. 1 die normally. I'd get my straight shot and do that. If it was a pack 40 in ambush, it's going to get its 2 dice. But I'm thinking, you know what? I really need to have this artillery shoot those tanks over there. Can I do bombardment? Artillery bombardment? Yes. As long as they haven't moved when you popped in the ambush here, If they don't move, you can do your artillery bombardment. So that's one of the nice things also about ambush is, yeah, you have the restrictions where you could put them, but once you put them in there and you don't move them, you can unleash a bunch of fire power on the opponent if you want to. All right, so. All right, we're almost done with just talking about ambush, and I'll go to immediate ambush. But let's say I held this platoon of rifle in ambush. Now, if a warrior, and I keep bringing Audie Murphy out because that's really the only warrior model I have as far as, except for the company commander and second in command. I mean, they're warriors too, but for this purpose, I always bring out Audie Murphy because that's the only one I have. So, Audie Murphy is a warrior. If he is a permanent part of this platoon, I buy this platoon, he comes with them. If I put them in ambush, he is also put in ambush. And he pops out with them when they pop out. But let's say Audie Murphy is just one of those warriors that can go off by himself, join, and then unjoin. Well, he's not a permanent part of this platoon. So if this platoon's held in ambush, he is not. So the only way you can have a warrior, I shouldn't say the only way. Unless they got a special rule, you can't put a warrior that is not part of a permanent part of a platoon in ambush. So that means your first and second in command cannot be put in ambush. Audie Murphy, if he runs around by himself, can join platoons, unjoin. He cannot be put in ambush. But if he's a permanent part of this platoon's put in ambush, he does get to be put in ambush. So just remember that little rule with warriors. It has to be a permanent part of this platoon. Now, one other one other team that will not be held in ambush. So I have this platoon of not 155s, long toms, and they come with the staff team, their platoon commander, and the observer. Well, this is fine, and I decide this is what I want to put in ambush this time. One of these will not be put in ambush. Just like that warrior was not put in ambush because, it wasn't a permanent part of this platoon. But all these are a permanent part of this platoon, but one of these will not be held in ambush. And that's the observer. Any independent teams, I don't care if they're part of the platoon or not, permanent part. Remember, a warrior has to be permanent part of the platoon, and then it is held in ambush with them. Independent teams, they do not start in ambush. They start on the table. Because the observer's out there and trying to spot. So when they come in, he's ready. So your independent teams will not be held in ambush, whether or not they're a permanent part of that platoon. So that's a little different than the warriors rule. So that's all I've got for ambush. Now we're going to go to what's called immediate ambush, which is a little different rule. Immediate ambush, basically, it's the same thing as, I had the infantry and the tank team and the artillery, and I decided I wanted to hold a tank team in ambush. So I'm going to hold this tank team in immediate ambush. Boom, I deploy these as usual. And the mission will tell you when you deploy them. It isn't at your starting step. That's ambushes. This is immediate ambush. Normally it's after everybody else is deployed, you then deploy them as the usual rules, not within 4 inches, watch the recon and stuff like that. So that's why it's called immediate ambush, because you immediately put them down before the game actually starts. I mean, everybody's deployed, you get to see where everybody's at, but then they are put on the table. So that is that for immediate ambush. I don't have to go too much more than that. So that's pretty simple. And again, the mission's going to tell you when you have to deploy these in immediate ambush. All right, so now I'm going to talk about reserves. Now, there is several different types of reserves. There's one just called reserves. There's another one called delayed reserves, scattered reserves, and finally, mobile reserves. So there's basically 4 different types of reserves, and the mission will tell you which one you use, because one opponent may be using reserves, and the other opponent may be using scattered reserves or delayed reserves. So the mission will tell you which one you will follow. So let's just start with the one called reserves. And it goes back to when I was talking about kind of like I want to hold one of these in ambush. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the machine gun out here. So let's say for some reason, this is all I have in my army, a platoon of Shermans, a platoon of artillery, a platoon of riflemen, and a platoon of machine guns. And it says that I'm going to be using reserves. The mission will state how many to put in reserve. Sometimes it's half. Sometimes just put one in reserve or something like that. But normally you'll see put half your platoons in reserve. So if I was to do half, that means I have to choose 2 of these platoons to be held to come in later in the game. And I'm not sure exactly when they're going to come in. That's part of the neat thing. It's kind of fog of war a little bit with platoons. I'd have to do half. So that means 2 of these start on the table and 2 start in reserves. And I can decide, like, I want to start with that in my infantry team, so these 2 will be held in reserve. Okay? Now, if it states half and you only have 3 platoons, you round up. Half of 3 is 1.5, round up 2, so that means 2 of these will be in reserves, only 1 of them will be on the table, so I'm going to put these 2 in reserves and start with them on the table. So be careful with the odd number. You round up as far as how many go in reserves. So let me go back to this situation. And I decided I wanted to start with these in reserve. So I put these on the table. It gets to my turn. When can I bring these in? Well, it all goes back to that starting step. So let's look at that again. Remember we did ambushes, air support. There's reserve. So that's number 6. Roll. It says roll. Roll for reserves. Well, this is pretty easy. You look at what turn it is. So this is turn 1. Okay, so turn 1. You roll 1 die. And remember, rolling for air support, you need a 5 or a 6. Same here, to get a reserve, you need a 5 or a 6. So if I was going, now I'm rolling for reserves, so I roll a 4. No reserve that turn. Well, that's horrible. Man, I'm going to roll 1 die every turn trying to get a 5 or 6 to bring somebody in? No. It's now turn 2. You're going through your starting step, roll for reserves. It's turn 2. You get 2 dice. And instead of being like the airplane, let's see if I can do it. Okay, I got 1. So that means I get 1 reserve in. But what if I roll a 5 and a 6? I would get both of them in. So unlike the airplane, you just need 1 success, the airplane comes in. This is for every success, you get to bring in a reserve. Of course, if you have no more than reserve, you don't roll anymore. And if you have 2 in reserve and were successful 3 times, you still only get to bring in 2 because that's all you've got. So every turn, as long as you got something in reserve, you add a die. So roll 3 dice, 4 dice, 5 dice. If it gets to turn 8, you're going to roll 8 dice, trying to get a 5 or a 6. Now, I've gone, these guys are in reserve. I've gone through turn 1. Let's see if I can do it. Come on, come on. I failed, yay. Well, I failed. Okay, so I go to turn 2. I get 2 dice. Come on, I want to fail. Oh, there we go. I failed again. Whenever you are rolling 3 or more dice now for reserves, successful or not, you at least get 1 in every turn. So 3rd turn, I'm unsuccessful. I'm at least going to get 1 of these in. 4th turn, I'm rolling 4 dice, and I fail again. I at least get to bring in 1. So just remember, when you're rolling 3 or more dice, you at least get 1. And in this situation, oh, I rolled a 6. I still only get 1. You don't add 1 to your number of successes. You get at least 1 if you got 1 or failed. If I would roll 2 successes, I would get to bring in 2. So just remember that little special rule with 3 dice. All right, so let's say I was successful at my reserve roll, and I'm going to bring in my artillery. And this can also apply to infantry that have, or other teams that have transports. Do you want them, well, let me just do it this way. You can start this and just put it on the table, but the furthest you can move from where they're able to deploy, and I'll get to that in just a minute, or deploy from, by the specific rules of where the reserves come from, is 4 inches is the maximum move they can make. So that means if they moved, that's no artillery bombardment. So they're not going to be able to do artillery bombardment, period, the first turn they come in. Or you can choose to have their transport bring them in, and that means they're going to get to move the rate of the transport, but that means they can't unlimber that turn. So, because they're being towed. So, do you want to bring these in and only move them up 4 inches from where they're able to come in on the table, and I'll explain that, but they're able to do their straight shot but no artillery shot? Or do you want to be able to move them a little further by using their transports? So you have that choice. Now, let's say these infantry were held in reserve, but they have a transport. Well, do you want to bring the infantry in and move them up to their normal movement rate? Or you can move at the double if you want to. Or do you want them to come in on their transport? The choice is yours. If they have a transport, do you want to use it or not when you bring them in from reserve? So I'm going to go through a little bit of the missions here to show you where your reserves will come from. So I'm going to look for a mission that says reserve. So this one, let's look. If you look at mission, special rules, meeting engagement, no reserves there. So let's skip on. Delayed reserves, which I'll get to, but there is reserves. So let's pretend this purple deployment area is ours. Oh, this is scattered reserves. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I want to hold off on that one just for a minute. So that one has scattered reserves. Here we go. So looking at this mission, let's say I'm the purple. I deploy here. It says defender reserves arrive within 16 inches of a corner. So this is where my reserves are going to come in from. 16 inches this way or 16 inches up. I can move them in from that area. So that means if I got a 12-inch movement, I go to the very top of that 16 and then start moving 12 inches up. Now let's look at this one. This one, oh, has reserves. I'm this. Defender's reserves arrive from here. So, oops, you can't see what I'm talking about. So, my reserves are going to come from this back edge and start moving in. So, each mission is going to tell you if it has reserves, where did it come from. This one looks the same. My reserves are going to come from my table edge side here. This one has ambushed. Oh, it has reserve. So let's see. Oh, this one. They come from the side in this area here. So it's not going to come in up here. It's going to be in my deployment zone. They're going to come in from the sides. So that's kind of interesting. And this one does not have ambush, so we're going to go on. And fighting withdrawal. Oh, there is ambush. But, yeah, there's ambush, but there's no reserves. So this one, oh, this one has reserves. So if I'm the purple, I'm the defender. This is scattered reserves, and I'll get to scattered in just a minute. And this one does have reserves also, which, oh, but it's the attacker has the reserves, and they're going to come in from the sides. And, oh, but defenders and reserves arrive from here. So I'm going to deploy on this side, but my reserves are going to come in from over here, this way. So I deployed here. I'm going there. My opponent's deploying in here, and his reserves are going to come in this side. Ooh, looks like an interesting little battle there. So you kind of get the idea of how you figure out where your units are going to come from. And you get to do your normal movement rate. You can, if you want, move at the double from reserves. But remember, the opponent's going to get those double dice at you. You know, it's an option. So let's talk a little bit about this scattered reserve. So I'm going to look at this encounter mission. And if I'm defending, I rolled my reserves. So my artillery, where'd they at? I hit them somewhere on me. So my wonderful artillery is going to come in. And, wow, you have these interesting numbers here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, basically, I'm not sure where my reserves are going to come in at. They're either going to come in over here, or along there. So if I rolled this, and, oh, you can't see. I'm going to have to, okay, I rolled a 5. So I rolled a 5. So that means within 16 inches of this corner, I could bring my artillery in. Do I want to start exact corner? Do I want to go 16 inches in, anywhere between there, and move them in? If I rolled a 1 or 2, it's 16 inches of this corner. So it's kind of like, see if I can find that one mission. Oh, it's kind of like this, where it says within 16 inches of this corner. That's what that scattered reserves is telling me. That if I roll a 1 or 2, 16 inches either this way, 5 or 6, this way. 3, 4 does not mean you start from the center area. I get to choose anywhere along this edge to bring them in. So that's almost exactly like, let's see if I can find it real quick. Well, I'm finding these others. Was it that last mission? There. That's almost like this one. Anywhere along here I can bring my, now I don't count 16 inches up and bring them in. It's from this back edge. So the same thing here. From this back edge, if I get to 3 or 4, I get to choose. If I really need them on this side, whew, I either want to roll a 1, 2, 3, or 4. If I need them on this side, I want to get a 3, 4, 5, or 6. If I roll 1 or 2, gosh, they're way over here. They're out of position. That's happened to me in a game. I really needed some stuff on this side, and I kept rolling over here, which didn't help. So that's how you do scatter reserves. Within 16 inches of the corner, depending upon which one you roll, 3 or 4, anywhere along this back edge you can bring them in. Now let's talk about the next thing. So I talked about reserves. I just talked about scattered reserves, which you're not sure where they're going to come in at. You may get choice, but you may get a bad roll too, and get them kind of where you don't want to get them. Another one is called delayed reserves. And that's exactly what it means, is your reserves are getting delayed. So before you rolled on turn 1, you got 1 die. Went to turn 2, you got 2 dice. Went to 3, you get 3 dice. And once you roll 3 or more dice, of course, you're getting automatically 1 in. Until you have no more reserves and you don't need to roll anymore. What delayed reserves say is, when you get to turn 3, you get 1 die to roll. So you don't even get to roll for reserves until turn 3 comes. And you only get 1, you don't get 3 dice because it's turn 3, you get 1 die. When it goes to turn 4, you're at 2 dice, as long as you still have reserves. Turn 5, you are now rolling 3 dice and you're guaranteed at least 1 platoon in. And if it goes to turn 6, of course you can roll. And it just goes up from there, as usual. But delayed is delayed till turn 3. That is going to be the first turn. If you're on delayed reserves, that's the first turn you get to start rolling, and you roll just 1 die. Trying to get that 5 or 6. Do I get lucky? Oh, I got a 5. Yeah. Woohoo! I get to bring in a reserve. Once you hit turn 5 and you're rolling those 3 dice, the same rules apply. Success or not, I was successful, but let's say I still only get 1 reserve in. This, I'd get 2. So you get the idea. Delayed reserves is just delaying it. You're rolling until turn 3. That's all delayed reserves is. Now this rule here, called armored reserves, could be kind of missed by some people. it's just a little blurb here on page 269 if you want to check it out. And basically, this applies if you're a defending team and the mission has reserves and prepared positions. So there's 3 things required. First is that you're the defending team and that there is reserves and prepared positions. And also I will say, if you're a tank company, this rule's not going to apply to you. So it's going to apply to a mechanized company, infantry company, or a fortified company only. What's doing is limiting how many fully armed, so not unarmored and stuff like that, fully armed vehicles that you can deploy. So if you're a tank company, you're okay. Just whatever the reserves say you put in reserves, go ahead and do that. However, if you're a mechanized company, which would be like maybe using some half tracks to move your men around. So you're a mechanized company. The most fully armed platoons you can deploy is 2. So if the rest of your army is, well, of course you're going to have a couple more than this, but most of your army is fully armed vehicles, no matter how many it says put in reserve, you can only, the max you could put out is 2 fully armed vehicles. Okay, so that's for mechanized. Well, what about if you're just an infantry? Well, now you're going to drop 1. You can only deploy 1 fully armed platoon. So it's kind of dropped there. It went from, oh, I can deploy 3 to I can now only deploy 1. So the last one is a fortified company, which you can put like minefields, barbed wire, trenches, and stuff like that. So can you guess how many fully armed platoons you get on the table? Remember, mechanized, we got 2. So let me go back. So mechanized, we got 2. Infantry, 1. So I'm pretty sure you can guess how many you get with a fortified. 0. So be careful of that little rule. It's called armored reserves, but it only applies if you're a defender and the mission has reserves and prepared positions and you are not a tank company. So some people may miss that rule. It's kind of hidden in there a little bit. One last thing I will say about this is that as far as the fully armored platoons that you have to hold in reserve, just think it's fully armored tank teams, but if they're all recon, they don't count. So if I have this tank team, I'm able to deploy. If I have another tank, I shouldn't say team, platoon, I can deploy it. Second one, I can't deploy it. But for some odd reason, let's say this fully armored tank unit is a recon, I can deploy it. And then I've got this one that's fully armored and it's recon. I can deploy it. So if they're all fully armored and all recon, I can still deploy them. But if they're not recon, I have to follow that rule. All right, the last one I want to talk about in reserves is mobile reserves. And just like it says, most of everything that's going to be in reserves is mobile or has wheels or vehicles. When I'm deciding to deploy, I can only deploy 1 platoon on the table with vehicles. So if I have, and it doesn't matter if it's tank team, infantry, fortified, it's not like armored reserves, mobile reserves. So things are mobile, they got little wheels, they get to move around very quickly. So I only get to deploy, if I'm a tank team, I only get to deploy 1 of those if I have everything's a tank. Every platoon is a tank, a Sherman platoon in some way. Let's say this is what I've got. I can only deploy 1 of those. Now, there are a few stipulations on that, and I'll get to the other teams besides just these tanks. If this is the only platoon I'm able to deploy, I can deploy a second platoon. Now, if I have infantry, well, I'm deploying this wheeled one plus the infantry. I can't deploy any more platoons out there as far as wheeled. But I don't have this infantry. All I've got is I'm just tanks. I can only deploy one of those. Well, since I can only deploy one, I get to deploy a second. Now, there are a few things we're not going to count. So don't count any warrior teams, whether they're in vehicles or not, or they're a vehicle, like your first in command. Your company commander may be a tank. Don't count warriors. Don't count independent teams. And supply ammo vehicles and recovery transport vehicles, which include like the Pioneer supply vehicles. Don't count those. Those can be deployed in addition to just that one. So be careful of that. That's got that little special rule in there. Now there's going to be one other thing that may pop up, and that has to do with, let's say I got these men, this rifle platoon, pretend this is a platoon, and they have transports. What do I do in that situation? Well, they've got a wheeled vehicle, so they're going to have to be held in reserve as part of that mobile reserves, unless they're one of those one platoon I'm allowed. Remember, just like this. So if I put that out there, it's my one platoon, and then I've got like a machine gun that I decided to deploy, that I had to deploy because of the situation here. I'm not allowed to deploy them because they have a vehicle. So transports do count if they're part of the platoon. The same would apply to if I had this artillery and I had this transport that can tow them around. Well, this is part of the mobile part of this team, so I can't not deploy them either. But let's say, wow, you know what? I really, really need these men out here, but they have a transport. I really need those men out there on that objective to hold it. Otherwise, the opponent is probably going to win the game. What do you do in that situation? Well, you can deploy them if the mission allows more reserves, like your half of your platoon held in reserve or something like that. If you're allowed to deploy them, normally, just don't count this. Normally, you would be, normally in the normal game, I would be able to deploy those. But because they have this, I can't. Well, if you want to be able to deploy those, you can take their transport, and they do not get to use it for the rest of the game, but they do get to be on the table. Well, you know what? I really need this artillery out there. Man, I need this artillery out there because, gosh, I need to start blasting the opponent down. He's got a lot of infantry, but I bought this transport for him. Well, if you can place this, forgetting out the mobile reserves, that mobile reserves wasn't there, and you were able to play these, and you want to, well, you can take their transport, get rid of it, and not use it for the rest of the game, and deploy them. So, if they have a transport, you got a choice. If you want to use the transport, and you have to put them in reserve, they're going in reserve. If you don't want to put them in reserve, but you can't place them out there because of that mobile reserves rule, you can go, you know what, I'm going to forget their vehicle, their transport. I'm not going to use it for the rest of the game. I need these guys out here. You can do that. Now, some of you may be thinking, like in this mission here, let me tilt this up. My reserves are going to come over here, so if you push everything over here to block it where I can't come in, because remember you can't come within 2 inches of tanks. Say I got infantry coming in, and you line all this up with tanks, and I can't come within 2 inches of you. You totally have blocked me from coming into the game. Well, basically, Flames of War is kind of a friendly little game that you can't block people like that in this game. So if that occurs, what I get to do is, let's say, let me move these stugs over here. Move this down. Let's say, and all right, so this is where I can come in, this little area here, and I've got infantry coming in, and you have placed stugs there to block my infantry coming in, because infantry and tanks won't go within 2 inches of each other. Well, in Flames of War, you can't block me from coming in. What happens is I get to come in and I get to push you 2 inches away from me. I'm going to come in and push you 2 inches away from me so I can get these guys into the game. So you can't block somebody from coming into the game from their reserve area. So keep that in mind. So I've covered reserves. I've covered armored reserves, which is one of those rules people may not catch. Delayed reserves. Remember, that's not till turn 3 do we start rolling. Scattered reserves, which is where they're going to come in. Are they going to come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, as far as like the table. And then mobile reserves, which is you don't start, if you got a lot of mobile stuff, you're not going to start with very much on the table.